Good evening. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Wednesday night Bible study where we're going through the book of Matthew, verse by verse by verse by verse. We're now in Matthew chapter 27. Again, sometime my mom and I will sing again, but not tonight. So hopefully you'll stick around for the Bible study, um, where I'm trying to teach or present the unbiased word. And by that I mean that whatever traditions we're from, Baptist, Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Holiness, um, some of the Bible verses that we read, we interpret through the lens of our denomination instead of in the context of how God was presenting them, verse by verse by verse. And so I'm trying to do that. And we're discovering that, oh, things that we thought, oh, that used to mean this. Actually, you can see in the context, here's what it actually means. And you don't have to do much interpretation. It's the context is right there, and so it's trying to present the unbiased word. Um, and so, in our last lesson, uh, Jesus was heading from the temple where he had been put on trial, the Temple Mount area. He wasn't put on trial in the temple, but in that complex of buildings around the temple, heading to Golgotha, to Calvary. It's the same word in the Greek and the Latin. It means the same, which just simply means the place of the skull. So somewhere, we assume, in that mountain range, the way the rocks looked, it looked like a skull. Um, so last time I was kind of speeding through. I know some of you didn't feel that way. You call that speeding? But yes, there's parts I was just speeding over, and God really spoke to me to slow down and really drill down. Like there's no hurry. So why not just take my time? So um, we're going to start in Matthew chapter 27, verse 31. Um, Matthew 27, verse 31, it says, "And when they had mocked him," talking about the soldiers mocking Jesus, because they put a crown on his head, put a fake scepter in his hand, they bowed, they took off the robe that Herod had given him and put on another robe, and oh, here he is, the king, uh, and beat him. Then they took off the robe and they made him carry the cross. This is, they took the robe off of him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. So they're heading to Golgotha, and there is controversy over where Golgotha is. There really shouldn't be, but there's a place called the Holy Church of the Sepulchre that's in Jerusalem, and they claim here's the spot where Jesus was crucified, and you can go there and visit it, and it's very nice. But there's a couple problems with that. First of all, for 300 years after Jesus was crucified, that was not the spot. It wasn't until King Constantine's mother came to visit Jerusalem, and where she said, "Oh, this looks like the spot," and so they said, "Yes, well, this will be the spot from now on." But was it? So uh, in John chapter 19, verse 17, it says, "And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is in Hebrew is Golgotha, in Latin is Calvary." Um, Now, Genesis 22 2, this is where I was talking about Denise Moore. Genesis 22 2 says, when God's talking to Abraham, then he said, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So, land of Moriah is where Jerusalem now sits. It's Moriah had several hills, not mountains, but just hills. Like any city might have hills. Like we've got Beverly Hills here, and Baldwin Hills, and Windsor Hills, and they're just hills that you can walk up in 15 minutes, 30 minutes. It's not, they're not huge mountains, but it's there's several of them, and that's where Jerusalem is built on this city, and especially there's one particular mountain area where the temple has been built. So he says, "I want you to go there to this Mount Moriah, to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So one of those specific mountains, and we think it's exactly where the temple is right now. Possibly. Some people think that. Could be a different spot. So that's where he went to offer his son. I did point out last week, and I just want to take my time. It says, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love." And this is the first use of the word love in the Bible. Genesis 22:2. You love your only son. This is why John 3:16, because where he says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son." He knows that that scripture, Genesis 22:2, is the first time he used the word. You're a father who loves your son. So he's referencing Genesis 22:2, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son." They knew the Bible really well because they had nothing else, right? There were no magazines, no books, no television shows, no nothing, nothing. So no video games, nothing. So the only book for them to learn, there weren't other books, was the Bible. And so when you'd hear a reference to the Bible, people would know. So people reading this back in John's day, they knew what he was referring to. God so loved the world, he gave his son. Abraham, you loved your son, you give him up. So, uh, so he heads to this Moriah, and there's several mountains together. There's a little space, and there's another mountain. But one of the mountains is separated by the brook Kidron. And that mountain, that separate mountain in that whole group of mountain ranges, is called the Mount of Olives. So we're going to get back to that. Um, anyway, so in 2 Chronicles 3:1, that's the other time the word Moriah or the Mount Moriah is referred to in the Old Testament. It's only referred to twice. When Abraham took his son there to that whole mountain range. And then in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah." So on one of those mountain ranges, similar to where Abraham sacrificed his son, that's where Solomon built the temple. It says, "Where the Lord had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite." So he's referring to the time when Israel was being judged, and David went to the threshing floor. So one of the mountain tops has a flat space. One of the hilltops has a flat space, and there was a threshing floor there, and that's where David went, and he pleaded for Israel to not be destroyed, and God had him build an altar there. So on that place is exactly where Solomon decided to build the temple. So it's in the same region where Abraham sacrificed his son. It may not have been exactly where Abraham, because there's different hilltops. I have a theory about where Abraham sacrificed his son, and I don't think it was exactly that place. I think it was the Mount of Olives. I think it was right east of there. Anyway, so Numbers, I referred to this last week, and I just want to take my time with it. In Numbers chapter 19, verse 2, when God is explaining to Moses and Aaron where he wants them to build the tabernacle, not the temple, but just the tent, so that God could bring his presence down and they can begin to sacrifice. This is how many years? I don't know, 300-400 years before David started building the temple and Solomon finished it, which the Lord has commanded, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, on which a yoke has never come." And as my wife pointed out to me, a heifer is a female calf that has not had kids yet, right? Yes, hasn't born a calf. Thank you. So bring, and also it can't have had no a yoke on it, meaning no man has led it around and told it what to do. So it's still just open to God and fresh and pure and without defect and without blemish. He says, "And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him." So your camp is set up here. You got to go outside the camp and slaughter it there. That's very significant. It says, "Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the of the heifer. So they would take it out and you had to burn it. And this is significant because normally they would just kill an animal and take its blood and then use the blood to as a sin offering, right? But he says, no, in this case, you have to burn it because the flesh must be consumed, not just the blood, but the flesh. And Jesus said, this is my blood shed for you, and this is my body broken for you. And again, we talk about the blood a lot, but the body was important. And so in this case, God said, I need the blood and the body totally consumed and burned. It says, then a man, this is verse 9 of Numbers chapter 19, then the man who was clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. It is for purifying from sin. So the ashes were put in water and then sprinkled on people, and that was the way to be purified from sin. That was the way. This was the inauguration ceremony for the temple. You can't go for the tabernacle. You can't even go in there until you've been purified. This body and blood that have been totally consumed of this heifer will purify you, right? And according to Jewish tradition, these ashes lasted for generations and generations and generations, which was the opposite of God making them going in every day and doing sacrifice and going in once a year and atoning for sin. This was supposed to last. It was just this one heifer was used to purify the whole thing, right? And so that obviously is symbolic of Jesus, and it had to be outside the camp. Now, I know this because in Hebrews chapter 13, the writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 11, says, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned outside the camp. So this had nothing to do with the sanctuary, where the sanctuary was built. This was on a separate hill, because the sanctuary was built where it is, where it was for thousands of years, but on a separate hill outside the camp is where the bodies are burned. He says, therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So this Church of the Sepulchre, where they say Jesus was crucified, is within the gate. But the Mount of Olives is outside the gate. And I believe that Jesus was crucified outside the gate because the writer of Hebrews said he suffered outside the gate, outside the eastern gate. And so, which is where the Mount of Olives is. All right. Now, in Matthew chapter 27, verse 33, he says, and when they had come to the place called Golgotha, that is to say, the place of the skull, and I believe that Jesus is going up the Mount of Olives. That's where Golgotha is, that's where Calvary was, because it's the place outside the gate. That's where the Mount of Olives is. So let me read a similar experience that David is having going up the Mount of Olives. Jesus was referred to several times as the Son of David. When he came into the city on Palm Sunday, yay, the Son of David is here. Hosanna, the Son of David. In fact, when Jesus asked the Pharisees, who is Christ? They said, oh, well, he's the Son of David. Okay, so then he asked them, so if he's the son, if the Christ, the Messiah who's to come, is the part of the human lineage of David, he's the son of David, how is he also his Lord? And they said, what? He says, remember, in the scriptures, he says, my Lord, the Lord said to my Lord, sit down until I make your enemies your footstool. So how is he calling him Lord? How is he also his Lord and his flesh and bone descendant? And the Pharisees, I don't know. That's a good one. Now there's an answer, which I'll tell you next week. But they were stumped. So Jesus wasn't trying to say, so you're wrong, he's not the Son of David. He's trying to say to them, think about it. Now he's the Son of David. How can he be Lord and his flesh and blood descendant? Well, the answer is kind of obvious, but we'll discuss it next week. So when I'm referring to David, and the reason why we're looking, David's also going to the Mount of Olives, is because God, who I call this lesson, God the great teacher, he was always showing Jerusalem. Again, they didn't have personal books in their homes. They didn't have personal Bibles in their homes. So a good teacher demonstrates verbally. He'll explain verbally to those people who learn by what they hear, and then he'll give them visuals. A good teacher, him or her, will give the students visuals for those visual learners who need to see it written on the board or see it. But he'll also demonstrate it for those kinesthetic learners who only learn by doing. And so I always had the most successful lessons when I explained it, when I had the right visuals, and then I got the class to act out. Then everybody learned. I would get in trouble sometimes. How come so many students in your class get A's? Not because the class is easy, but because I try to use every method to teach all those different ways of teaching, all those modalities. And God would do that. He would give a visible demonstration. Here's what the Messiah is going to do, so that when Jesus came, people would recognize it. Oh, I read about that. I saw it. I heard it. God acted that out. So he would often, like Abraham taking his son up to the mountain to sacrifice his only son, he's saying, now remember this, remember this. Even if you just hear the story by the campfire, so that when I sacrifice my only son, you'll go, huh, that's the same thing, right? So 2 Samuel chapter 14 says, so Joab went to the king. Joab is going to King David. Joab went to King David and told him, and here's what he told him. Absalom, David's son Absalom had been estranged from his father because he had killed his stepbrother. That would cause dissension in many families. You did what? Now he killed his stepbrother because his stepbrother had slept with his sister, and so he felt that was the only way to handle it. I must kill you. So that upset David, and they hadn't spoken in years. So Absalom says, I want to speak with my father. I want to speak with my father. I want tell him I want to see. If he won't speak with me, then he needs to just exile me. It makes no sense for me to be here, and he won't see me. Okay. So 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 33 said, so Joab went to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and he bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And then the king kissed Absalom. And that's his way of saying, okay, I'm making up to you. And David's very affectionate, right? That David doesn't hold anything back. He dances, he cries, he shouts, he hugs. He's that kind of person, right? So he kisses Absalom. This makes an impression on Absalom. Absalom, now that, I've been forgiven, he stands in the gate of the city, and everybody comes in and out of the gate. People who are coming to see the king, Absalom would grab them and say, oh man, isn't the king doing you wrong? It's so terrible how the king is doing you wrong. I just can't believe. If I were a judge, if I were king, I would just so be on your side, right? And so 2 Samuel chapter 15, very next chapter, verse 5, it says, and so it was whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, to Absalom, that he put out his hand and take him and kiss him, which he learned from David, because Absalom was not a kissing type person. He was a killing type person. But he said, oh, this is how David gets all this favor. Okay. So people would bow down and he'd stand them up and said no, and he'd kiss them, right? And in this manner, it says, verse 6, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So he's slowly betraying his father. People, before they even get a chance to go see him, Absalom's already poisoning their mind. Oh, he's not going to really give you what you want, but if I were king, I would so give you what you want. Politicians do this, right? If I was in office, I would give everybody 5 Cadillacs or whatever. A chicken in every pot and a mule in every farm. Okay, so he's stealing their hearts, and he's using David's own methods against them, and he's kissing them. And this is not even Absalom's personality. This is why. So Jesus knows the scriptures, and he knows that Absalom is stealing people's hearts with a kiss. So this is why in Luke 22:48, it said, when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciple, and Judas shows up with the Roman soldiers, in Luke 22, verse 47, we'll start there. It says, and while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. And Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Not that Jesus is confused. Jesus, like, you're going to use the cliche right from, that's the famous betrayal. Absalom was betraying everybody, was betraying David, and I'm the son of David. You're going to just fit right into this? Are you sure you want to do that? You're portraying me with a kiss. Because that's, if the Jews who knew the Bible, oh, that kiss, got to beware that man who's kissing people, right? That's what Absalom was doing. So 2 Samuel chapter 15. I want to go on with this Absalom story and this betrayal of David, and show we want to see the parallels to this story, because this all led David up on the Mount of Olives, which I think Jesus and he are taking that same journey together. Okay. Well, not together, parallel journeys. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 7, it says, "Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king." So he's been there, he's poisoning everybody against David, right? He's kissing everybody, promising all this stuff. 40 years he's there. So he says to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron, and I'm going to pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." So once Absalom had fled after he killed his brother, he fled up to Syria. Jacob fled to Syria. That's a place to go and flee when you think you're in trouble. And now, and I told the Lord, if I get to come back to Jerusalem, then I will just serve you. So let me go to Hebron, because I got to complete my vow. Naturally, of course, he's going there so that he can gather his forces together and come attack his father. So if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, "Go in peace," because David did not expect him that he was lying to him. And so he arose and he went to Hebron. He starts to gather his forces, and then verse 12 says, "Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, who's David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, and while he offered sacrifices." So he while he's there offering sacrifices, he said, "Hey, go get David's counselor, because he knows David best. He knows what David's going to do, what he's not going to do, and he'll come down and have him advise me." And the second part of verse 12 says, "And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number." So he's inviting Ahithophel into his betrayal. Now, this will eventually upset David when he finds out that his close friend and counselor, who's been with him for years, is now working with the enemy. But David has no clue. Yet it parallels Matthew chapter 26. So while Ahithophel and Absalom, David's counselor and David's son, are conspiring against him, Matthew 26 verse 14 says, "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, 'What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?' And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver, which we know is like the price of a slave. And so from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him." So they're conspiring. Let me know when Jesus is in the right spot, because they never knew where Jesus was going to go. They never knew, because Jesus was just following the Holy Spirit. He wasn't following any sort of pattern. But don't you worry, I will counsel you. I'm his, one of his close friends. I will counsel you, and I'll let you know where he's going to be at what time, and then you can come and grab him. So the same conversation Judas is having with the chief priest, that is what David's son Absalom and Ahithophel, David's counselor, are having the same sort of conspiracy. So there's parallel that God is drawing on purpose, because they want us to recognize the Messiah. You think the Messiah is going to be the son of David. Well, look, see how everything in Jesus' life lines up with what David did? Maybe he's the son of David. And he's giving everybody the opportunity to go, oh, this is the fulfillment of the prophecy, because that's the problem. When Jesus was saying, "Who do men say that I am?" Either I'm the son of David, either I'm this Messiah that's coming, or I'm a crazy person. But that's what their life will hang on. And I mean their eternal life will hang on. So God is presenting every way to paint the picture. I don't want Jesus just to show up and people say, "Well, how was I supposed to know?" Well, for 1,000 years, I was painting the picture. I was verbally telling you what he was going to do. And I gave you visual examples so you could see what happened. And so we can see when it's happening in Jesus' life, you can compare and go, oh, he's the son of David. Look, the same things are happening. Now, back to 2 Samuel. I'm in chapter 15, starting in verse 13. It says, "Now a messenger came to David, saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel are now with Absalom.' So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom.'" So let me assure you, David is shocked, because all he has done for Israel and Jerusalem is just lay down his life. And by the way, David's born in Bethlehem. Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Okay, so all these parallels. So he'd lay down his life for Jerusalem and the people there, and they come and says, you know what? Everybody hates you now, and they're all on Absalom's side. What? So it says, well, arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom, because I know Absalom is crazy. He's a killer, and he will come after me. It says, make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. So we need to get out of here, otherwise he's going to bring a war. So, and verse 23 says, and all the country wept with a loud voice. So everybody is, oh no, oh my God, we're losing the city. Absalom's going to come try to kill us, and they're weeping with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. Now, what they crossed over is they left Jerusalem, and there's that little brook of Kidron, and they crossed over the brook, and now they're starting to go up the Mount of Olives, which we'll see. So they crossed over. Oh, well, I could have just read it. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. Okay, so now I'm skipping down to verse 25. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. Now, it's important we look at David's state of mind. David's not thinking victory, right? So they grab the ark like, well, if Absalom's coming, I'm going to grab this ark. We're going to get out of here. David said, no, take the ark back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he'll bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. I'll see the ark, and I'll see the little tent that I built for God where he's dwelling at the time. The temple hadn't been built yet. So he'll bring me back and show both it and the dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you. Here I am. Let him do to me as seems good to him. So David has no idea. I don't know if I win. I don't know if I get to come back. Maybe Absalom catches up with me and kills me. He has no idea. He just feels like, wow, I've been king. I've been doing everything for these people. And now I'm being dethroned. I'm being kicked out. They're coming after me. My son's going to try to kill me because he did kill my other son. So killing is not a problem with Absalom. He loves to be killing people. And I'm old now, and I'm grabbing these people. And I don't even know if I'm going to. So his state of mind is, I don't know if God's on my side or not. God may say, I do not delight in you. I'm upset with you. And I have no idea. In fact, in a later chapter, a guy comes out and starts screaming at David, you're a mess, and and they're wanting to kill him. And David's like, no, that could be God speaking through him to me. You know, maybe I am a mess. Maybe God, so leave him alone. Maybe that's God telling me what a mess I am. Because David's looking at his life and all the mistakes he's made. Oh, I think I had my best friend killed, and I committed adultery, and I have like 3 other wives. I've been a mess. So if this is the end of me, I deserve it. So David is depressed. In fact, verse 30, it says, so David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives. So he's going up the hill, slowly going up the Mount of Olives. And he wept as he went up. And he had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went. And having your head covered at this time was an act of shame during this time. Period is an act of shame. You can read in Esther where they're talking about how he covered their heads because we were about to, and having your bare feet also was an act of, I think it's in Jeremiah, was meant that you were ashamed, and now, take off your shoes and just walk barefoot. And so he's totally an outcast. He's crying. Everyone's crying. All the people, they had covered their heads. They're all weeping. Then someone told David, so it's not bad enough, right? Saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David freaks out. Oh my goodness. So my counselor, the one who's going to tell me which way I should go and what I should do, because he's assuming his counselor is among the crowd. He's just waiting for him to come up and say, okay, David, you should do, because David needed a counselor. David needed a counselor. David was bipolar, and David needed someone to calm him down and give him some good direction. In fact, David so upset about hearing that his counselor has betrayed him and is now with Absalom, with the person who's going to try to kill him. He wrote a psalm about it. If you read Psalm 55, verse 12, he said, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me who has exalted himself against me. then I could hide from him. And he's saying, if it was an enemy, I could get it. Right? And that's how we think. Well, that person doesn't like me anyway. Or, well, or if I know who the enemy is, I can hide. He says, but it was you, verse 13, a man my equal, my companion, and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and we walked to the house of God in the throng. I mean, you counseled me. You're the ones betraying me. And David would write songs. David was Taylor Swift. He would write, if you upset him, if you broke up with him, he's going to write a song about you. Not even a problem. So he's upset. In fact, in Psalm 41:9, he says, even my own familiar friend whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. So David is upset. He writes a song about it, like a lot of songwriters do. Jesus is aware. Jesus knows all the songs of David. And so he's constantly referencing him, seeing who's going to pick up on it. In John 13, verse 18, it says, I do not speak concerning all of you. Oh, okay. So at this point, they're taking the Last Supper, right? He says, I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. So he's quoting David. David's talking about Ahithophel, his friend who's betrayed him. But Jesus is saying, that really was about me. Even though David went through that, God allowed that to happen as just a description of what's going on with me. So that the scripture might be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it comes to pass, you may believe that I am he. So I'm explaining all this stuff about somebody who's going to betray me. I want you to let you know that somebody's going to betray me, because when David went through all of that, David thought he was talking about his life, but he really was talking about mine. And I'm telling you in advance, so when I get betrayed and when all this bad stuff happens, you don't think, oh no, everything's going bad. This was all part of the plan, and we've got to get used to that as Christians. I heard a sermon today about the storm, because Jesus said, let's get in the boat, and then he kind of led them into the storm. And this guy said, God will lead you into the storm, but the good thing is he's there with you in the boat, so don't freak out. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying. This was all planned out. This happened to David 1,000 years ago, but this is all planned out. We're okay. Actually, Moses was 1,000 years ago. This happened to David 800 years ago, but we're okay. We're okay. I'm telling you in advance so that when it happens, you don't freak. Well, that didn't help them. They freaked out, and so do we. Bless our hearts. We think that, gee, God didn't know. God, it's all in advance. God's like shocked. What's going on? Now, verse 31. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, most assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. And I just want to explain this leaning on the bosom thing. The picture of the Last Supper that Michelangelo painted, which is beautiful, is totally inaccurate. They weren't sitting in chairs. They didn't have chairs. The food is on like a mat on the ground, like a table on the ground. It's on the ground. And they're leaning on their sides, right, with their legs kicked out. They're leaning on one side. So one arm is holding them up and the other hand they're using to eat their food. And they're just kind of lined up, one after the other, all facing kind of the same direction, right? So when John leans back, he's not like he's in a chair and he's like leaning on Jesus' bosom and they're cozy. He leans back and his back touches Jesus' breast and he says, hey, Jesus, what's going on, right? So I just want you guys to have the right picture of this. So when Jesus said these things, he was troubled in spirit. Most assuredly, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So he's leaning back, trying to hear what he's saying. It says, and Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask, who was it of whom he spoke? So I want you to picture, Jesus is lying down. John's in front of him. So Jesus is facing John's back. Peter's in front of John. John looks over and sees what Jesus is doing and says, hey, ask him, right? He kind of so John leans back. And who's behind Jesus? Judas. please know that at the Last Supper, Judas was on side, John's on the other. Okay. So Simon motioned him to ask who it was of him who he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. Now this all has to do with he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. He just referenced that 30 seconds ago. This is that thing that David said. You ate bread with me and you lift up your heel against me. So he's purposely saying, I'm going to do the bread thing. Because he could have said, the guy who I put my shoes next to, or the guy who I braid his hair later on, or the guy we played Monopoly with. But he's doing the bread thing so they'll recognize it from the scripture, right? He who eats bread with me. So he says, Jesus says, it is he whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot because he's right next to him, the son of Simon, because he wanted to fulfill that scripture. He was that David said. David had the experience. David spoke it out. But Jesus is saying, I know you're experiencing that, David, but it's really my life you're experiencing. God is just using you as his example so that when I go through it, people will go, oh, he's the son of David. Okay, back to Psalm 55. Here's another anguish that David's going through, that he's writing about this experience that he's having, because this is the biggest betrayal in his life. He has put forth his hands against those who are at peace with him. He has broken his covenant. So he's talking about his friend. You've put forth your hands against those people who are at peace with you. You've broken our covenant. We had a treaty. We were friends. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. So he's saying one thing, but really it's evil, right? So Jesus passes this thing, and he watch the guy that I did bread with. Only John's paying attention. Everybody else is like eating their food. Because John's the only one who recorded this, even though Jesus said it out loud. So he hands it to Judas. And then Matthew 26:25 says, then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, Rabbi, is it I? And he said to him, you've said it. So, I mean, and this is Peter, this is David. His words are just sweet. Rabbi, could it be me? You know? And David saying his words were like butter, but really they were poison, right? So Judas just falls right into it and does exactly what's happening. And so God is having David live out Jesus' life. 2 Samuel verse 15, 31, getting back to David's going up Mount Moriah, the Mount of Olives, right? He's all upset. He's weeping. He's crying. Oh my goodness, I can't believe what's happening. And David said, oh Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. So, because that's the guy, right? His best friend who's now betrayed him, who's now with Absalom. Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God. There was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. So another friend of his shows up. So it says when he finally got to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God. So he's crying and he's worshiping God through his psalms. And he delivers the most famous psalm of all. Well, no, that's be the Lord is my shepherd. He doesn't deliver that one. It's the one right before that one, Psalm 22. Okay, which we'll get to in a second. But he says, may his counsel turn to madness. I just want to read you this because it's fascinating what happened. Moreover, so Ahithophel, David's counselor, who's now with Absalom, is advising him. And we went over this earlier in a different context. Ahithophel said to Absalom, now let me choose 12,000 men and I will arise and I'll pursue David tonight. So this is because I know how David is and he's slow. He's going to be crying. He's going to be all upset. We get 12,000 men, pursue him tonight. We kill him. It's done. But then Absalom said, now call Hushai, the Archite also, and let us hear what he says. Because Hushai had snuck down there and David had said, when you get to there, tell him that you want to counsel him and he'll believe you because he's stupid. So let's hear what he says. And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him saying, now Ahithophel has spoken in this manner, but shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. So Hushai said to Absalom, the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good. No, don't do that. And so he tells him the whole other thing. You should wait a day or two and then build up your forces and then go after David, which was dumb because that was going to give David enough time to get over the Mount of Olives and then go north and cross the Jordan and then be safe. And he crosses the Jordan and goes to the place where Jacob saw that. 2 companies of angels, not Jacob's ladder. That was a different place. when he came back from Laban, he saw those two company of angels, and they called that place Manaheim, like Anaheim, and so that's where David hid out. Okay, so Hushai advises that, and uh, verse 14 says, so Absalom and all the men of Israel said, wow, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel, because they're stupid. For the Lord had purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster in Absalom. So sure enough, he didn't listen to the good advice of Ahithophel. And this is important. So it says, verse 23, now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey. He arose, went home to his house, to his city. He put his household in order, and he hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb. So here's Ahithophel's thinking. We're going to lose. I can now see that Absalom's not going to listen to me. We're going to lose. And when we lose, I'm going to be blamed because I'm the one that betrayed David. I'm going to be killed. So I might as well just save time and kill myself now. Here's the parallel thing. Judas, in Matthew 27, verse 3, it says, then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. These are the two suicides in the Bible, paralleling. David's friend, close friend, betrays him, but realizes he's not going to be believed. His plan didn't work, kills himself. Judas, who really was betraying Jesus as a way of forcing his hand, like, I'll bring the Roman army and Jesus will be forced, because I've seen him raise people from the dead. I've seen him do all sorts of stuff. He'll then do what I want him to do, and he'll kill all those Romans, because Judas is not on the Roman side, right? I'll bring those Romans, he'll kill, and Jesus refused. And at that moment, when he says, I could bring a legion of angels, but that's not the plan, Judas realized, oh no, he really is the Messiah, and now he's going to be condemned. Because it says when he saw that he was condemned, oh no, the Messiah, he's innocent. I'm realizing now who he is. Now, Judas doesn't know this is the plan. He does not know this is the plan. He thinks he's messed up the plan. He says, and when they find out that I'm the one that betrayed Jesus, he's thinking just like Ahithophel, I'm going to be blamed, and and they're going to come after me. I might as well kill myself now. And they're totally parallel on purpose. God is living out Jesus' life first through David so they could see it. So when they see Jesus doing all the same things, they can go, oh, this is just like David. He's giving them a living example through David of what the Messiah is going to do. I'm almost done. So David goes on up. It says, so David went up to the Mount of Ascent of Olives, and he wept as he went up. And he had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went. Then someone said, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom, and David is despairing, right? He doesn't even know if God's going to deliver him. It says that he goes up to the top of the mountain, and he worships God. And here's the psalm that he gave. Then that he wrote as he's worshiping God. It begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? And from the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season, and I'm not silent. Right? So we know that he's been crying, and then all those people are crying, and he says, I'm crying, why have you forsaken me? These are David's words, because when he looks at his situation, he thinks, God's forsaken me. My son's on his way to kill me. My counselor is left. I'm barefoot. I'm crying. I don't know what I'm going to do. Next week, we're going to study this 22nd Psalm and just see all the parallels and understand why Jesus quoted it from the cross. Did God really forsake Jesus? Which our tradition teaches us, yes, because God can't look at sin. Because you wonder, well, then how would he know that I sinned if he can't look at it? So, but did he forsake him? Or is Jesus quoting David for a whole different reason? Because he's having this discussion with the Pharisees. Am I the son of David? You think maybe I'm the son of David? Let me quote this psalm to you. Go read it. Go read it. My God, why is it? Because he's still like preaching to the Pharisees, hoping people will go and realize, this is exactly what Jesus is going through. He's still, okay, but we'll get to that next week. Thank you so much for listening in. On Sundays, we're going through the book of Genesis, just verse by verse, just attacking it and trying to look at an unbiased way what's really going on, what is God really saying in context. Um, and some, if you don't have to do both, though, feel free to only watch once a week or twice a week or whatever you want, however God leads you. I'm just blessed whenever you tune in, and I will see you again soon. All right, bye bye. And